Hello, folks. Welcome to Kudlow. I'm Larry Kudlow. So probably the most important fiscal negotiations that's going to take place this year is over the debt ceiling and the budget. And so far, it's gone nowhere. Now, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy met with President Biden about 2 months ago with no results. And since then, they haven't met. No cup of coffee, no high tea, not even a drive-in movie. Nothing. So yesterday, Speaker Kevin McCarthy put some heat on President Biden with a strong letter asking for another meeting to reach a deal. And then before nightfall, President Biden wrote back that he's not ready. So Biden's also still calling for a so-called clean bill, right, to raise the debt ceiling without any spending cuts. He knows, just as everyone in the country knows, that there is going to be a deal to raise the debt ceiling, and that deal is going to have spending cuts, no matter what Mr. Biden says. Now, the president in his letter says, and I'm going to quote, "This has been done by previous Congresses with no conditions attached, and this Congress should act quickly to do so now," end quote. But I'm saying, in fact, previous Congresses have always compromised with a higher debt ceiling attached to spending cuts and sometimes other measures. Biden's hypocrisy is illustrated by just a little bit of recent history, when, as Barack Obama's vice president, he, Biden, led the charge for a deal, that's back in 2011, that included a debt hike and some tough spending caps with sequestration penalties. Now, here's a snippet from CBS 60 Minutes then, Scott Pelley interviewing Joe Biden. Take a listen.
The vice president has been up here on Capitol Hill today, pressing reluctant Democrats to support the compromise.
How can you explain the fact that grown men and women are unwilling to budge up till now, and still some of them are still unwilling to budge, by taking an absolute position, my way or no way?
Right. Of course. It's been done before. We just need a compromise. There's proof pudding. Now, Biden's letter to McCarthy goes on, talks about how Republicans want to raise deficits by $3 trillion, with big corporations and the super wealthy not paying their fair share of taxes, which is nonsense, because the bulk of the Trump tax cuts went to middle and lower income people, driving down the minority unemployment rate to record lows, boosting blue-collar family incomes, and so forth and so on. We've been through this so many times. Biden just keeps lying about the Trump tax cuts and keeps up his drumbeat that the rich don't pay their fair share. It's all hogwash and malarkey. In fact, Biden claims his budget, released a few weeks ago, will cut the deficit. But actually, he does it simply by raising taxes on the most successful earners and large and small businesses and American firms overseas. Policies, by the way, that would slam down the economy, raise the inflation rate, and give us an even bigger economic mess than the one we already have. Don't forget, Biden has no spending cuts in his budget. He's got $5 trillion in tax hikes. It's a Bernie Sanders budget. More to the point, Speaker Kevin McCarthy has a very constructive letter where he argues that a debt deal should reduce excessive non-defense spending, reclaim unspent COVID funds, and really, super importantly, strengthen work requirements for those without dependents who are able-bodied. It's the kind of workfare reform that was enacted years ago under President Bill Clinton, which Biden voted for as a U.S. Senator. I want to repeat that. Biden voted for workfare reforms as a U.S. Senator in the mid-90s, just as Mr. Biden led the charge to get a debt compromise in 2011 that included spending cuts, all right? Just to make the record straight. Now, this, of course, is a new Joe Biden. Today's version, as I say, it's a Bernie Sanders version. But perhaps Biden at some point will regain his consciousness, which has some common sense. At least in those days, he had some common sense. Now, I want to go back for one moment to the Clinton-Gingrich work requirement reforms to welfare back in the mid-90s, because so important, all right? We're going to put stuff up on the full screen. Welfare, food stamps, SSI, Medicaid, child nutrition, foster care, social service block grants, EITC, maternal and child health. Total savings way back then were $54 billion. Now, Now, that was an enormous number in the mid-1990s. Adjusted for inflation today, it would be worth about $92 billion. And if you include the payroll tax revenues paid for by those who went from welfare to work, the savings would be well over $100 billion. It's also worth noting that the record reduction in poverty that occurred after workfare reform nearly halved the poverty rate while increasing employment and reducing spending and cutting deficits. I think we have the chart, I hope we do, of the collapse of the poverty rate that occurred with the workfare revolution of the mid-90s. So, hats off to Speaker Kevin McCarthy for including work requirements. It would be a huge reform that Joe Biden himself once supported. That is, that would be the old Joe Biden, the pre-Bernie Sanders Joe Biden, when Joe Biden was Joe Biden from Scranton, PA. Remember that? Now, on top of all this, when you add in Steve Scalise's H.R. 1 lower energy cost bill, which would be a huge factor cutting inflation and promoting growth, Speaker Kevin McCarthy has put together a very strong Republican agenda for economic growth and prosperity, with or without Joe Biden. And that is my riff.